Alright guys, so today we're going to be talking about doing a setup on your own guitar, and really it's going to be using, a very minute amount of tools. I don't want people to have to go out and buy stuff they're only going to use for this. This video is sort of aimed at people who have either bought one of their first guitars brand new or used and may not realize that it ideally needs a setup so that it can be as playable as it possibly can. What I mean by that is when you buy let's say a brand new guitar, say I don't know, a Fender Squire or something like that, a lot of people think that if you're buying brand new, the guitar should be perfect out of the box, but unfortunately oftentimes that's not the case, and it's not always the manufacturer's fault. A lot of the times guitars are stored for months and months on end. They be traveling in a lot of different climates. Guitars are made of wood, things move, there's a lot of things that can be adjusted on the guitar. A lot of it is personal preference, but I'm going to give you some sort of, a nice guideline of settings that I use on all guitars, and it's something that you can then adjust to your own personal preference. For a guitar company to put out a guitar and then have it professionally set up perfectly ready for the player does cost time and money. It's kind of factored into the cost of when you buy an expensive instrument. Hopefully after this video you'll be able to set up your own guitar and try it out without fear of damaging or anything like that. So the guitar that we're going to be setting up is this Fender Player. And there's just a few things I had to sort of take care of, which is very typical of me, buying any guitar, because it's very unlikely that, especially a used guitar, that it's been set up professionally. Now, if you have a Strat style guitar or anything with a tremolo, I'm not going to go into too much detail about setting up a tremolo, because that's a whole nother ball game. And especially if you're a beginner and one of your first guitars, I'd avoid using the tremolo, because most of the time they're just going to cause you problems and they'll go out of tune a lot. Tremolos on any guitar need to be set up perfectly and maintained well to function and stay nice and in tune. And even then, nothing's perfect. What I have here is, it's almost like a hardtail. So this tremolo won't move. And I've done that by tightening this claw back here. So I've taken the back control plate off and screwed it down all the way. What that does, it pulls this bridge plate down to the body so it can't go back any further, and it's pulling it enough so that even when I bend strings, it's not going to move that tremolo. This essentially makes the guitar hardtail and much easier to maintain, keep in tune, things like that. So that's my recommendation. Adjust these screws. There'll be screws here, or sometimes there'll be 6. And the screws at the back. Just get it so that your tremolo's nice and flush. That's if you don't want to worry about using the tremolo and keeping that tune. Okay, first things first. So we're just going to take like a good overview of the guitar and just do a rough inspection. Of course, if you've bought a used guitar, just plug it in, make sure it works, and that you're getting sounds from everywhere. Try all the different pickup positions, make sure there's no dead spots. Turn these control knobs, whatever guitar you've got. Make sure nothing's crackly and they all work. Perfect. If you're having some noise issues, maybe you're turning a pot and things are starting to crackle, can sometimes even happen on the switch. Again, mostly when you buy, a lot of the time when you buy a used guitar, it depends on the storage and moisture and things like that. Pots either get dirty or they might become a bit corroded over time. That doesn't mean you need to go out and buy brand new parts and have someone install them for you. This is the first sort of solution for you. So it's contact cleaner. It's made by WD-40, but there's a lot of different brands out there, not to be confused with regular WD-40. This is electrical contact cleaner. So it won't damage any electrical parts. All you want to do, you can start, so if you've got a Stratocaster type guitar, accessing the electronics requires you, most of the time, getting these strings out of the way and unscrewing all of these screws around the pick guard, and that will then lift out and you can access all the controls. Once you've done that, you just want to find the suspect switch that's causing you problems and just spray a bunch of this into it. Give it a good spray. You can also take the knobs off the guitar, pull them off. If it's quite hard to get a grip under, You can use a guitar pick to sort of wedge it under and sort of try and pry it off. Again, you can buy tools for this stuff, but we want to save as much money as we can here. So once you've done that, you can also spray it on the top side just to try and clear out any sort of dirt. The next thing I would do is just check for any loose parts or loose connections on the guitar. So that will go for strap buttons, so one here and one down here. I'm just making sure that I can't turn them with my hands. Everything feels solid. Next would be things like tuners up here. So most tuners will have a nut, you can see here, that's sort of locking everything into place. Take an appropriate size spanner. Just log in there and just make sure everything's tightened up nicely. So the output jack on the guitar is a notorious thing to come loose. A lot of times when I buy a used guitar, these are always a bit loose. Over time, as a guitar cable is plugged in and things move, gets twisted, this nut here can, over time, will just become loose. The problem is your whole jack socket is now loose, and every time it wobbles, and you run the risk of actually disconnecting from the wires in there. So you really don't want that to be loose. Take this off. 2 screws here, or 4 screws on something like a Les Paul style guitar. Just hold the jack in place and tighten down this nut. Similar process would be if you've got loose pots here. So maybe if you've got a loose pot also, once you've taken the control plate off, again, just hold the pot in place and then tighten up that nut, put the knobs back on. All right, so next up is actually neck relief. And in my experience, this is what guitar players fear doing the most. They don't want to break the neck. They don't want to snap the truss rod. So let me give you a quick rundown. A truss rod is a rod inside your guitar neck. It goes all the way up. Without it, this is just a long piece of wood. In this case, a 1-piece maple neck. The strings are pulling it this way. You tighten them up, you've got tension. So the strings are actually pulling this bit of wood back towards the body. So without it, you'd end up with sort of a banana. So the truss rod is there to counteract that and straighten it back into place. Now, we don't want a perfectly straight truss rod. We will encounter buzzing issues that way. To find out if we even need a truss rod adjustment in the first place, we need to measure the neck relief. So how do we do that? Press the first fret on your low E string and the last fret. And now we want to measure the distance from the bottom of your low E string to the top of the 8th fret. Now, obviously, I have run out of appendages to actually reach this 8th fret. So there's a couple of things you could do. If you have a capo, it makes life a lot easier. That's taking care of one. So you could fret the last fret, and we're checking this height here. Alternatively, you can ask a friend to just hold down their finger over that first string, or if you've got big enough hands, you can do some acrobatics and check there. But what are we actually looking for? Each guitar manufacturer will have recommended specs. They want, they will measure this distance, and they will say it should be whatever value. In our case, so for this Fender Strat with a 9.5 radius, they want a 0.25 millimeter gap. What I do now is just do it by feel. I've set up enough guitars and I've done this enough times that I know what it should feel like. When I press the string on this 8th fret, it should be an almost rattle, if that makes sense. Barely any distance, not a lot of movement. If you have a bit, you press down the string, you can feel it move a whole bunch, then your neck is too bowed. So we want to tighten it, we want to straighten it out. If you have the opposite and you've got no room whatsoever, then your neck is bowed the other way. So we need to release that truss rod a little bit. So the way we do that, up here is how you access the truss rod, and you're going to need an Allen key. If you bought the guitar brand new, hopefully they would have put the appropriate size Allen keys in the box. They do differ from guitar to guitar. They're not always the same size. You need to use the appropriate size Allen key. I can't stress this enough. If you use one that's slightly too small but still fits in, you can still move it, you run the risk of actually stripping out this nut up here to the point where it can become unusable. So make sure that when you insert it, so right here, find where it locks in. So this one fits perfectly. And the way I know that, I feel it lock in. And if I try and move it either side, I can't do so without putting a decent amount of pressure on there. So I know it is now locked in. You can see that the strings, I'm doing this with the strings on because I want this tension on here. If the strings are off, the neck's going to be have a lot different relief in it. So if I had too much gap, meaning the neck is bowed, I need to straighten it out. So righty tighty, lefty loosey. So if you're looking down at the headstock, I would want to turn that right. And it should feel tighter and tighter the more you do that. Go little by little to doing maybe a 90-degree turn, things like that. And vice versa, if your neck was too straight, you want to loosen it a bit. Turn it that way. Go little by little and go back and check. Check everything's okay. So this guitar's in a good place. So I don't need to move it anymore. But I did make some truss rod adjustments when I first got it. Once you've made that adjustment, you won't see anything different, but it'll feel a lot, should feel a lot better. If you're struggling with doing the measurement, what you can do, if you play notes down at the first, third fret, somewhere around here, there shouldn't be any buzzing. If you do encounter buzzing, it means that your truss rod is now too tight. Your neck is bending the other way. So a cool trick you can do is tighten the truss rod a bit. Keep doing it until you find notes down here start to buzz. You then know that you've sort of reached the limit of how straight you want that neck to be, and then you can back it off a bit until it stops buzzing. It's a rough guide because all guitars are built different, the quality of the wood, things like that. But that's sort of where you want to be. The neck is almost straight. It's got a slight curve into it. So again, to recap, make sure you use the right size Allen key. Can't stress that enough. Go little by little. You're not going to break this truss rod. You have to really, really crank it down and give it some force and tighten it all the way to do any damage to it. In my opinion, this is the most important thing for a guitar to start feeling nice. I could tell right away if I pick up a guitar and the neck's not, the neck's all bendy like a banana, then it's just not going to play very nice, no matter what you do over here. All right, so moving on. So we've adjusted our neck. That's in the right spot. Depending on the amount of adjustment that you've made to your neck, the strings now will be either closer or further away from the fretboard than they were before. If we straighten out the neck, it actually brings the strings closer to the fretboard. Over here, to the saddles on your guitar, and this will vary from, different style guitars. Gibson or, Les Paul style guitars have what we call Tone Pros bridge. It's easier and quicker to set the adjustment there. You just turn it on, one on each side. So here we have 6 individual saddles. So we can lower or heighten all of these strings individually. So the way you actually lower and heighten these strings, you can see there'll be 2 grub screws on either side of this saddle. You'll either unscrew them, which will lower the saddle, or tighten them, which will make the saddle higher. Now, if you're going to have any guitar-related tool, I'd recommend one of these. This one is by Baroque. And it's just a string action ruler. Right, I got this off Amazon. I just looked at what had the best reviews and got that one. There's a lot of different ones out there. I believe Dunlop make one. But this is just going to save a lot of time, and it's going to give you accurate readings of what your string action is, things like that. You can also use it to adjust your pickup height and so on. It's just a nice, quick, easy tool. A little bit blurry, but down here in the bottom, this is what I use for string heights, and it's set in millimeters. So right here we have 2 millimeters. So I'm going to lay this across my fret at the 12th fret. So I'll start on the high E string. So here's what that looks like on screen you can see how I'm measuring it, and you can repeat this process for, all the strings. Now, again, each guitar manufacturer will have recommended string heights depending on the guitar model. And a lot of it depends on the player, a lot of it depends on the radius of the neck, how well the frets are leveled, things like that. On cheaper guitars, it's hard to get away with low action. So the lower the strings are to the neck, let's say the easier it is to play. The less you have to push down. There's a lot less distance for you to cover. That's not always the most optimal sort of setup there is. For me personally, I don't like my strings too low because it can then cause issues with bending. So the lower the action, you run the risk of notes choking out and they'll start buzzing, which I don't really like. It's also harder if you don't have really, really tall frets. It's also harder to get underneath that string and push it up if the strings are too low. Typically what I do, so on a Strat style guitar, I will start with a 2mm gap. So that's at the 12th fret, between the bottom of the string and the top of that 12th fret right here. So about 2mm, that's the ballpark I'll shoot for. And then I'll play the guitar for a little bit and I'll see if I want to try lowering anything. A thing you can do, you can lower the action little by little until you start encountering problems. So if things start buzzing or bends are choking out, again, like the neck relief thing, you know you've reached your limit. Okay, so then back it off. That's how I used to do it when I was younger before I started measuring things. It's nice to have the measurements so you can go to look online for the factory specs so you can see how the guitar should have come out of the box. A lot of this stuff is personal preference. You might like a very, very low action. Maybe you don't do much bending at all. You might be able to get away with lower action. So experiment. One more thing, your string saddles, they'll all be different heights because the curvature of the frets and the fretboard, you won't be able to see here. Well, you can see there's a slight, we call this a radius. In our case, it's a 9.5 inch radius. So my saddles, whatever the low and high E strings were, say if they're set at 2mm, ideally, the radius of these saddles will also be a 9.5 inch radius. You can go out and get yourself radius gauges, but you don't necessarily need them. What you can do, again, I've started at 2mm on either side. So I'll go through every string and make sure it's 2mm, and you will end up with that same radius over here. So they don't all want to be the same height. I've seen that on a lot of sort of students' guitars. Big no-no. So next on our checklist is intonation. And getting this right will make sure our guitar is in tune all up and down the fretboard. So for example, I'm going to tune my low E string. So it's perfectly in tune. I'm then going to fret the 12th fret, which will also give me an E note, but an octave higher. Now you may not be able to hear, but that's actually too flat compared to this E. And the way stringed instruments work, the shorter the string, the higher pitch the note. So if I play this note and this string is now this distance to here, it's telling me that this string is too long and I need to shorten it. So I need to move this saddle towards the neck, which will shorten that length of string and make it a bit sharper. So you're going to take a Phillips head screwdriver. On the back there will be these screws, and I'm going to lefty-loosey just undo that screw a bit. When you try and play that same string now, you should find that it's out of tune. I'm getting a D note now because we've moved that string. So that is now perfectly in tune. If I pressed it here and it was saying now that E string is too sharp, then you need to do the opposite. You want to tighten this screw down here and bring that saddle further back. And what this will allow you to do, chords, you play chords down here. They'll be nice and in tune all the way up the fretboard. The last thing you can look at is now your strings are set in place, you can look at the pickup height. So in our case on a Stratocaster, we have 3 pickups. And like everything, Fender will tell you, we recommend that your pickups be the certain height. And it's a nice place to start. And what I typically go for, just to see on a guitar, I can take that same string gauge and just find where it's got millimeters. Yeah, so I can get a nice ruling on there. If I press the last fret and I'm going to measure the top of this metal pole piece on this pickup to the bottom of the low E string and just measure where that is. In my case, it's about 3.5 millimeters on the low E. Almost 2.5 millimeters on the high E. So slightly lower, about a millimeter lower on the low E string. And this is just from personal preference. I'm generally quite a hard hitter on the guitar. If this pickup's too close to the low E string, my lower strings are going to overpower my higher ones. So I like to give it a little bit of leeway there. After that, so you could start at maybe 2.5 mil on either side and see how that does. Pickups being closer to the strings will give it more output. It will change some of the tonality as well, but that's generally the consensus. But find your manufacturer's specifications, try those, and then maybe you want to move your pickup height depending on your playing style. Right, so we've covered sort of, cleaning electronics, tightening things up, your string height, the neck, intonation, pickup height. So those are sort of the basics and things I look at doing a setup. So again, I've tried to keep things relatively simple and not needing a whole bunch of brand new tools that you might not use for anything else. We're trying to do this on a budget, save ourselves from going out to a guitar store and paying someone to do it for you. A guitar setup really makes or breaks the playability of guitar. I've gone to guitar shops and played, guitars that are upwards of £2,000 and they just don't play well because they haven't been set up. They've been left around and sort of abused on the shelf for God knows how long. I've tried to cover as many sort of talking points as I can without going into too much detail, assuming that, whoever's watching knows next to nothing about setting up a guitar. Hopefully I've sort of made it bulletproof. If not, just let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to sort of go over and help you out. There is also, again, a lot of information online, but this is just, again, aimed at people who would be doing this sort of for the first time, and hopefully this sort of knocks out any fear of doing this to your own guitar. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. If you're going to try this on one of your own guitars, just let me know how it goes. If you get stuck, just shoot me a message or comment down below. If there's something that you'd like me to do a video on, let me know as well. All right, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.